Hello and welcome to the program. I am Suren. Interestingly, some individuals and paranormal enthusiasts believe that the spirits can communicate with the living through digital systems, like electronic voice phenomenon, or EVP, and spirit boxes. However, there is no scientific evidence to support these claims, and scientists generally view them as pseudoscience or misinterpretations of random sounds. But there is no real evidence of this either that we can take note of. Commonly cited or even accepted methods and scientific perspectives are like follows. Electronic voice phenomena, EVP. This involves interpreting sounds and electronic recordings as being the spirit voices, often only perceivable when played backwards, as it was, or at different speeds, again, as it used to be. But scientific explanations include auditory pareidolia, that is, interpreting random sounds as voices, or apophenia, or perceiving patterns and random information, equipment artifacts, and, unfortunately, some hoaxes. Spirit boxes. These devices rapidly scan radio frequencies as it used to be, and some believe spirit manipulated those frequencies to communicate. Those scientific or non-scientific explanations point to similar misinterpretations of random noise, we are told. Instrumental transcommunication, or ITC, is a term that encompasses various methods used to attempt communication with spirits or even extraterrestrials through electronic devices, including audio recorders, video, and radio. There are, however, a number of very important considerations. Let's look at them. Lack of complete scientific validation. No absolute study has ever been able to confirm the existence or non-existence of ghosts or spirits, or the ability of spirits to communicate through digital systems. What about alternative explanations? Well, phenomena attributed to spirits are often explained by psychological and physical factors these days, such as misinterpretation of sounds, environmental factors, or user bias, remembering that science always remains biased and critical without any further considerations, but with a reason. Let's consider some of the historic facts. Historical figures like Thomas Edison, for instance, expressed interest in communicating with the dead, but there is no credible evidence that they succeeded in creating devices for such purposes then. Electronic voice phenomenon, according to encyclopedias, as written, for instance, ghost hunting and parapsychology. Electronic voice phenomenon, or EVP, sounds found on electronic recordings that are interpreted as spirit voices for a while. One parapsychologist, Konstantin Rodiv, who popularized the idea in the 1970s, described EVP as typically brief, usually the length of a word or a short phrase. Enthusiasts consider EVP to be a form of paranormal phenomenon which is often found in recordings with static or other background noise. Scientists regard EVP as being a form of auditory pareidolia, interpreting random sounds as voices in one's own language, and pseudoscience, promulgated by popular culture. Prosaic explanations for EVP include apophenia, or perceiving patterns in random information and equipment artifacts, and, of course, hoaxes. As the spiritualist religious movement became prominent in the 1840s into 1940s with a distinguishing belief that the spirits of the dead can be contacted by mediums. New technologies of the era, including photography, were employed by spiritualists in an effort to demonstrate contact with the spirit world. So popular were such ideas that Thomas Edison was asked in an interview with Scientific American to comment on the possibility of using his inventions to communicate with spirits. He replied that if the spirits were only capable of subtle influences, a sensitive recording device would provide a better chance of spirit communication than the table tipping or Ouija boards, which the mediums employed at the time. However, there is no indication that Edison ever designed or constructed a device for such a purpose. Sound recordings became widespread. Mediums explored using this technology to demonstrate communication with the dead as well. However, spiritualism declined in the later part of the 20th century, but attempts to use portable recording devices and modern digital technologies to communicate with spirits, even extraterrestrials, continued. Attila von Schalay, an American photographer, was among the first to try recording what he believed to be voices of the dead as a way to augment his investigations in photographing ghosts. He began his attempts in 1941 using a 78 RPM record, but it was not until 1956, after switching to a reel-to-reel tape recorder, that he believed he was successful. Working with Raymond Baylis, von Schalay conducted several recording sessions with a custom-made equipment, consisting of a microphone in an insulated cabinet connected to an external recording device and speaker. He reported finding many sounds on the tape that could not be heard on the speaker at the time of recording, which were captured when there was no one in the cabinet. He believed these sounds to be the voices of discarnate spirits. Among the first recordings believed to be spirit voices were such messages as, "This is G, hot dog, art, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you all." He and Raymond Baylis's work was published by the Journal of the American Society for Psychic Research in 1959. Baylis later went on to co-author the 1979 book, Phone Calls from the Dead. In 1959, Swedish painter and film producer Fredrik Jürgensen was recording bird songs. Upon playing the tape later, he heard that as he interpreted to be his dead father's voice, and then the spirit of his deceased wife calling his name. He went on to make several more recordings, including one that about which he said contained a message from his late mother. Raudive voices. Konstantin Raudive, the psychologist who had taught at Uppsala University in Sweden and who had worked in conjunction with Jürgensen, made over 100,000 recordings, which he described as being communications with the deceased people. Some of these recordings were conducted in NRF screen laboratory and contained sounds or words Raudive said were identified in an attempt to confirm the content of his collection of recordings. He invited listeners to hear and interpret them. He believed that the clarity of the voices heard in his recordings implied that they could not be readily explained by normal means. He published his first book, Breakthrough, an Amazing Experiment in Electronic Communication with the Dead, in 1968. And it was translated into English in 1971. Spiracom and Frank's Box. In 1980, William O'Neill constructed an electronic audio device called the Spiracom and claimed the device was built to specifications which he received psychically from George Miller, the scientist who had died 6 years previously. At a Washington, D.C. press conference on 6th of April 1982, O'Neill stated that he was able to hold two-way conversations with spirits through the Spiracom device and provided the design, speaking of its specifications, to the researchers for free. However, nobody is known to have replicated the results O'Neill claimed using his Spiracom devices. O'Neill's partner, a retired industrialist, George Meek, attributed O'Neill's success and the inability of others to replicate to O'Neill's mediumistic abilities, forming part of the loop that made the system work. In 2020, Kenny Bedell wrote a comprehensive article explaining the origins of the Spiracom had been developed by O'Neill and Meek. He was prompted to do so by the re-emergence of the device on the television series Ghost Hunters. He comprehensively debunked the science behind the device in both the original development and the Ghost Hunters episode. Another electronic device scientifically constructed in an attempt to capture EVP is Frank's Box, or the Ghost Box, created in 2002 by EVP enthusiast Frank Sumption, for supposed to facilitate a real-time communication with the dead. Sumption also claimed he received his design instructions from the spirit world. The device is described as a combination of white noise generator and AM radio receiver modified to sweep back and forth through the AM band, selecting split-second snippets of sound. Critics of the device say it's effective, subjective, and incapable of being replicated. And since it relies on radio noise and what any meaningful response a user gets is purely coincidental, or simply the result of pareidolia. Paranormal researcher Ben Redford writes that Frank's Box is a modern version of the Ouija board, also known as the broken radio. Interest in a 21st century is quite enormous. In 1982, Sarah Estep founded the American Association of Electronic Voice Phenomena, AA-EVP, in Swerner Park, Maryland, a non-profit organization with the purpose of increasing awareness of EVP and of teaching standardized methods for capturing it. Estep began her operation exploration of EVP in 1976 and says she has made hundreds of recordings of messages from deceased friends, relatives, and extras from, she speculated, or originated from other planets or dimensions. The term instrumental transcommunication, or ITC, was coined by Ernst Senkowski in the 1970s to refer more generally to communication through any sort of electronic device such as tape recorders, fax machines, television sets, or computers between spirits or the other deceased entities and the living. One particularly famous, reclaimed incident of ITC occurred when the image of EVP enthusiast Frederick Jorgensen, whose funeral was held that day, was said to have appeared on a television screen in the home of a colleague, which had been purposefully tuned to a vacant channel. ITC enthusiasts also looked at the TV and video camera feedback loop of the Drost effect. In 1979, parapsychologist D. Scott Rogo described an alleged paranormal phenomenon in which people report that they receive simple, brief, and usually single occurrence telephone calls from spirits of deceased relatives, friends, or strangers. Rosemary Guiley has written within the psychology establishment, Rogo was often faulted for poor scholarship, which critics said lead to erroneous conclusions. In 1995, this parapsychologist, David Fontana, proposed in an article that poltergeists could haunt tape recorders, speculated that this may have happened to the parapsychologist Maurice Gross, who investigated the Enfield poltergeist cases. However, Tom Finn, an expert for the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, examined Fontana's article and suggested an entirely naturalistic explanation for the phenomena. According to the skeptical investigator Joe Nickell, occasionally, especially with all the tape recordings under humid conditions, the tape travels, it can adhere to one of the guideposts. When this happens on a deck, both supply and take-up spindles are powered. The tape continues to feed, creating a fold, and it was such a loop of tape, Flynn theorizes, that threaded its way and the works of Gross's recorder. In 1997, Imans Baruch of the Department of Psychology at the University of Western Ontario conducted a series of experiments using the methods of EVP investigator Konstantin Rodiev and the work of instrumental transcommunication researcher Mark Macy. As a guide, a radio was tuned to an empty frequency, and over 81 sessions, a total of 60 hours and 11 minutes of recordings were collected. During recordings, a person either did sit in silence or attempted to make verbal contact with potential sources of EVP. Baruch stated that he did record several events that sounded like voices, but they were too few and too random to represent viable data, and too open to interpretation to be described definitely as EVP. He concluded, while we did replicate EVP in the weaker sense of finding voices on audio tapes, none of the phenomenon found in our study was clearly anomalous, let alone attributable in deceased beings. Hence, we have failed to replicate EVP in the strong sense. The findings were published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration in 2001 and included a literature review. In 2005, the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research published a report by paranormal investigator Alexander McRae. McRae conducted recording sessions using a device of his own design that generated EVP in an attempt to demonstrate that different individuals would interpret EVP in the recordings the same way. McRae asked 7 people to compare some selections to a list of 5 phrases he provided and to choose the best match. McRae said the results of the listening panels indicated that the selections were of paranormal origin. Portable digital voice recorders are currently the technology of choice for some EVP investigators. Since some of these devices are very susceptible to radio frequency or RF contamination, EVP enthusiasts sometimes try to record EVP in RF in the sound-screened rooms. Some EVP enthusiasts describe hearing the words in EVP as an ability much like learning a new language. Skeptics suggest that the claimed instances may be misinterpretation of natural phenomena, inadvertent influence of the electronic equipment by researchers, or deliberate influencing of the researchers and equipment by third parties. EVP and ITC are seldom researched within the scientific community. That's a fact. So most research in the field is carried out by amateur researchers who mostly lack training and resources to conduct scientific research and who are motivated by subjective notions. Paranormal claims for the origin of EVP include living humans imprinting thoughts directly on an electronic medium through psychokinesis and communication by deceased entities or beings such as the spirits, nature energies, beings from other dimensions, or even extraterrestrials. Paranormal explanations for EVP generally assume production of EVP by a communicating intelligences through means other than the typical functioning of communication technologies. Natural explanations for reported instances of EVP tend to dispute this assumption explicitly and provide explanations which do not require novel mechanisms that are not based on recognized scientific phenomena. One study by psychologist Baruch was unable to replicate suggested paranormal origins for EVP recorded under controlled conditions. Brian Regal, a critic in the Encyclopedia, 2009, has written a case can be made for the idea that many EVPs are artifacts of the recording process itself, with which the operators are familiar. The majority of EVPs have alternative, non-spiritual sources, and anomalous ones have no clear proof if they are of spiritual origin. There are a number of simple scientific explanations that can count for why some listeners to the static noise on audio devices may believe they hear voices, including radio interference and tendency of the human brain to recognize patterns in random stimuli. Some recordings may be also created by frauds and, unfortunately, pranksters. Psychology and perception. Let's consider. Auditory pareidolia is the situation created when the brain incorrectly interprets random patterns as being familiar patterns. In case of EVP, it could result in an observer interpreting random noise on an audio recording as being the familiar sound of a human voice. The propensity for an apparent voice heard in white noise recordings to be in a language understood well by those researching it, rather than in an unfamiliar language, has been cited as the evidence of this, and a broad class of phenomena referred to by author Joe Banks are Rorschach audio has been described as a global explanation for all manifestations of EVP. In a 2019 investigation of supposedly haunted painting in a West Virginia museum, paranormal researcher Kenny Biddle investigated the claims made by the museum owner and ghost hunters that an EVP recording clearly saying the woman's name as Annie is really the voice of the woman in the portrait. The name Annie is written on the back of the portrait, which primarily is anyone listening for the name to know what name to listen for. The EVP was created using the Radio Shack radio modified to allow it to continually scan through the available AM or FM frequencies without muting the sound. Recording a general question by the ghost hunter, "What is your name?" I can't guarantee sooner or later you will hear something that sounds like a name. And there is a good chance of being a name because you are listening to a radio broadcast, news reports, commercials, and so on, which often include names. Listed words such as company, anything, anyone, mahogany, many, or even any, as the words that can be commonly heard while listening to the radio. The phrase would also sound like any to anyone primarily listening for hearing the name Annie. Skeptics such as David Federline, Chris French, Terence Hills or Heinz, and Michael Shermer say that EVP are usually recorded by raising the noise floor, the electrical noise created by all electrical devices, in order to create white noise. When this noise is filtered, it can be made to produce noises which sound like speech. Federline says that this is no different from using a wah panel on a guitar, which is a focused sweep filter which moves around the spectrum and creates wah sounds, exactly like some EVP. Yes, in combination with such things as cross-modulation of radio stations or faulty ground loops can cause the impression of paranormal voices. Since the human brain is evolved to recognize patterns, and if a person listens to the noise long enough, the brain will detect words, even when there is no intelligent source for that. Expectation also plays an important role in making people believe they are hearing voices within the random noise. Apophenia is related to, but distinct from, pareidolia. Apophenia is defined as spontaneous findings of connections or meaning in things which are random, unconnected, or meaningless, and has been put forward as a possible explanation. According to the psychologist James Alcock, what people hear in EVP recordings can best be explained by apophenia, cross-modulation, or simple expectation, and wishful thinking. Alcock concluded that electronic voice phenomena are the products of hope and expectation. These claims wither away under the light of scientific scrutiny. However, let me present to you something. Here is an experimental conversation while using the Transcend Theory app. This recording was made shortly before my daughter Birgit's friend had a car accident and passed away, a few hours or shortly before this news was shared by her. Hope to speak to a wider community and to you all. Remember the time we spent at the bar? But he died up there, so suddenly, and now he's with us. Don't tell her that we're conversing with you, because she wouldn't believe you at all, as she is being brought up from childhood not to accept you since your permanent separation. Or would she? All we can say now, rest, dear man, rest in peace. This is not a fake news, it is the reality. After a short pause, another voice spoke in a few short words at a time, saying the following words: grab your food and broaden your views. However, we are not going to tax your mind. What kind of pie was it? It was so good. What a joy in the air. There was much panic, and I was smoking. Oh, you can guess what it was. Did you like the rose waffles? Did you know about the UFOs? My goodness, we are talking to nuts. We can talk all night through, but when there is no one to understand, it becomes hard, right? We can only try, and try to record. But as you can see, our boy is now gone from your midst, and next chat is only available through this line. You want to leave it now, if you so desire. For a while, maybe, and perhaps for a long time span. But take note, God bless us all, as we bless you. Have a beer on us. Enjoy the film. What you will see is for your eyes only. Please stay close. I have so much to tell you. Why, you might ask, all about my being a drifting man? I would say, do not ever live like a dog, but safely crossing your road. Got it? In a week's time, all will be forgotten. All will be gone. Let's all play fair, shall we? You can't see me any longer. I'm no longer with you. No longer sharing meals or drinks now. It really is tough. It is high and dry, my dear. It is sad to miss ya all and fall apart from that is what life is all about. It's where we are at. And remember our song? The conversations on the phone and the riddles about the world and, hey, my days were great. My taste changed somehow. I'm indebted for being let to sit with you Hello, remember me? I am Adam. I could show you so much up in here, anything about the edge. Oh, I have been crumbling for the lies told to me and about me. Oh, mine. Oh, so sad. But such was life. I tried to teach them, and teaching where it was real fun, but worrying for all the sorrows you were forced into, repeating over and over, I don't do it anymore, but flying into my home is a possibility, and smiling again finally, while resting at the bottom of my rock once more. I know we exist, although you might think otherwise. Hey, you need to look after your health. I should have done better, but I did not. Here is a big lot, a crookman's head. That was mine. This is now the season of the next layer of existence. And the person I saw coming out of you? Not true, it was. But for me, at the time, when I saw it, hey, I too loved the Oscar-winning guitar, and the sounds were so beautiful even in here. And we are. And even if you give so less credit to this story, or need to use some sort of assistance to comprehend, I can't say. Maybe your ideas should be seen with a new pair of eyes and listened to with a new set of ears. I saw some men back here and the toys in their hands, and there is a girl pointing to a knob far away, and we see it too. They did say only very little, yet that was the introduction. Yes, we found you growing maturer and maturer, and it was warmer in the bus, wasn't it? Silent was your talk, and seeing you putting the heat up a little at home. And humor was also good. A drop of drink with a giant dustbin for a glass. It was like I have experienced more of very heartfelt worries with what you were led into. Why was it so, and what was real? I can't tell you. What was but just a giant dust ball, I would say. Why was it so? Let's say we just rehearsed, and shall we go out of our scene now? Oh my, how wonderful to be in love on your part, so quickly after the short corresponding, sad separation. Talking, listening, and not interpreting things, and only just putting it all as it was experienced. We'll meet again. So, the snippets of words put together, and that is the result. With that, I shall end this episode until we meet again. Keep smiling and be happy. Thank you.